charity rummage sale at Springfield Community Center was winding down on a crisp October afternoon when antique collector David Chen spotted the modest wooden frame tucked between a stack of old magazines and a cracked mirror. The black and white photograph inside showed what appeared to be a typical American family enjoying a summer picnic in 1908. The scene was perfectly ordinary. A father in a white shirt and suspenders sat cross-legged on a checkered blanket, while his wife in a long skirt and high-necked blouse arranged food from a wicker basket. Two young children, a boy and a girl, played nearby among the tall grass of what looked like a meadow outside Springfield, Massachusetts. David, who specialized in early 20th century American photography, had seen thousands of similar family portraits. The formal poses, the careful arrangement of the picnic spread, the Sunday best clothing worn even for outdoor activities. Everything screamed typical. Middle-class American leisure from the Roosevelt era. Just $5 for the frame, said the elderly volunteer, manning the sale table. Found it in Mrs. Patterson's attic after she passed. Poor dear had no family left to claim her things. David handed over the money, drawn more by the quality of the frame than the photograph itself. As he carried it to his car, late afternoon sunlight caught the glass at an angle that highlighted details invisible under the fluorescent lights of the community center. For just a moment, something about the father's posture caught his attention. The man appeared to be sitting casually on the picnic blanket, but there was something deliberate about his positioning, something that suggested this wasn't quite the carefree family moment it appeared to be. David set the frame on his passenger seat and drove home, unaware that he had just purchased what would prove to be one of the most important historical documents of early federal law enforcement, a photograph that would rewrite the history of organized crime. Investigation in America. Back in his home office, David positioned the photograph under his professional-grade magnifying lamp. What he discovered made him lean back in his chair, blinking hard to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. The father's left hand rested casually on what appeared to be part of the checkered picnic blanket. But under magnification, David could see that the man wasn't simply resting his hand on fabric. Partially visible beneath his palm and fingers were the edges of what appeared to be documents, papers that had been carefully positioned under the blanket before the photograph was taken. The positioning was too deliberate to be accidental. The father had arranged himself specifically to conceal whatever lay beneath his hand, while still allowing careful observers to detect its presence. The corner of what looked like official letterhead peeked out from under his thumb, and the edge of a second document was visible near his wrist. David examined the technical quality of the photograph. The clarity was exceptional for 1908, suggesting a professional photographer rather than a family snapshot. The composition was carefully planned, with each family member positioned to appear natural while maintaining clear sight lines that wouldn't obstruct the father's strategic placement. The mother's expression, which had seemed pleasant at first glance, showed subtle signs of tension around her eyes. The children appeared genuinely at play, but they were positioned farther from their father than would be typical for a family portrait. David pulled out his laptop and began researching professional photographers in Springfield, Massachusetts, during 1908. He cross-referenced newspaper advertisements and business directories, looking for studios that specialized in outdoor photography, and might have been hired for what appeared to be a very unusual family portrait. The inscription on the back of the photograph was minimal. Springfield, summer 1908. No family name, no photographer's mark, no other identifying information. But David had learned that the most interesting historical photographs often came with the least documentation. Something about this image wasn't what it appeared to be, and David felt the familiar thrill of a mystery beginning to unfold. David's research into Springfield's 1908 photography studios led him to the local historical society, where volunteer curator Margaret Willis had spent decades cataloging the city's visual history. When he showed her the photograph, her reaction was immediate and surprising. "Oh my," she whispered, adjusting her glasses to examine the image more closely. "This looks like it might be connected to the Patterson case." Patterson case? David's pulse quickened. Margaret disappeared into the archives and returned with a folder of newspaper clippings from the Springfield Republican, dated summer and fall of 1908. The headlines told a fascinating story. Local businessman vanishes, family of 4 missing, federal investigators probe counterfeiting ring. The Patterson family, Robert, Helen, and their 2 children, disappeared in August 1908, Margaret explained. Robert ran a small printing business downtown. The federal marshals suspected he was involved with counterfeiters, but they could never prove it. The whole family just vanished one night, leaving their house fully furnished and their business accounts untouched. David studied the newspaper descriptions. Robert Patterson was described as a man in his 30s with dark hair and a mustache, matching the father in his photograph. Helen Patterson was noted as being in her late 20s with light brown hair worn in the Gibson girl style popular at the time. But the most intriguing detail came from a follow-up article dated September 1908, Federal investigators report that evidence related to the counterfeiting investigation may have been hidden or destroyed before the Patterson family's disappearance. Marshals believe Robert Patterson may have been cooperating with federal authorities prior to his vanishing. David's mind raced. Could the documents hidden under the father's hand in the picnic photograph be evidence related to the counterfeiting case? Had Robert Patterson arranged this seemingly innocent family portrait as a way to document or preserve crucial information? "Margaret," David said carefully, "do you have any record of what happened to the Patterson family after they disappeared?" She shook her head sadly. They were never found. The case went cold within a few months. The federal marshals moved on to other investigations, and Springfield forgot about the whole affair. It was treated as a family that fled to avoid prosecution. But David was beginning to suspect there was much more to the story than a simple case of criminals on the run. David's next step led him to the National Archives in Boston, where federal law enforcement records from the early 1900s were housed. With Margaret's assistance, he requested files related to counterfeiting investigations in western Massachusetts. During 1908, the records painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal operation that had been flooding New England with fake currency for over 2 years. The Secret Service, still a relatively new federal agency, had been struggling to infiltrate the network and identify its leaders. A breakthrough document caught David's attention. A memo dated July 15, 1908, from Agent William Hayes to his supervisor in Washington. The memo referenced Asset P, a local printing business owner who had agreed to provide information about the counterfeiting operation in exchange for protection for his family. Asset P has provided valuable intelligence about the operation's printing methods and distribution network, the memo stated. However, his position is becoming increasingly dangerous. The subjects suspect he may be cooperating with federal authorities. We are arranging secure documentation of all evidence provided by Asset P before extracting him and his family to safety. David's hands trembled as he read the final line. Asset P has requested that evidence be preserved through photographic documentation, as he fears traditional written reports could be discovered and compromise his family's safety. Robert Patterson, Asset P, hadn't been a counterfeiter. He had been a federal informant whose printing expertise made him valuable in understanding how the fake currency was being produced. The picnic photograph wasn't a family portrait. It was a covert method of documenting evidence while maintaining the appearance of a normal family outing. David requested additional files and discovered correspondence between Agent Hayes and his supervisors about extraction plans for the Patterson family. The operation was scheduled for August 20th, 1908. But according to newspaper accounts, the family had disappeared on August 18th, 2 days before the planned extraction. Something had gone wrong. The question was whether the Patterson family had fled on their own, been murdered by the counterfeiters, or successfully escaped with federal assistance, but under new identities. The photograph in David's possession might be the only surviving evidence of a federal operation that had been classified and forgotten for over a century. Armed with his new understanding of Robert Patterson's role as a federal informant, David returned to examine the photograph with fresh eyes. Using high-powered magnification and digital enhancement techniques, he began to study every detail of the documents partially visible under Patterson's hand, the corner of official letterhead that peeked. Out from under Patterson's thumb bore what appeared to be an eagle emblem, consistent with federal government correspondence. More importantly, David could make out partial text that seemed to reference specific dates and locations. He photographed the image under different lighting conditions and used photo editing software to enhance the contrast around the hidden documents. Gradually, fragments of text became visible. Shipment, July 23rd, warehouse district, plates stored. These weren't random papers Robert Patterson happened to be sitting on. They were carefully positioned intelligence reports detailing the counterfeiting operation's activities, schedules, and locations. David also noticed something else he had initially missed. Helen Patterson's handbag, positioned beside her on the picnic blanket, was slightly open. Under magnification, he could see what appeared to be the corner of additional documents protruding from inside. The entire family had been involved in documenting evidence. This wasn't just a father protecting his family. It was a coordinated effort to preserve crucial intelligence about a criminal network that threatened the American monetary system. David discovered one more crucial detail. Embedded in the pattern of the picnic blanket, barely visible without careful examination, was what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. The geometric patterns weren't random decorative elements. They were a coded representation of Springfield's warehouse district. With specific buildings marked, Robert Patterson had been extraordinarily clever. He had created a photograph that appeared completely innocent to casual observers, but contained multiple layers of encoded intelligence information. Anyone intercepting the image would see only a family picnic, but federal agents would recognize the hidden documentation system. The question remained, had Agent Hayes and his team received this photographic evidence before the Patterson family disappeared? Or had it been lost when the operation went wrong? David's research into Agent William Hayes led him to personnel records that revealed a career dedicated to combating financial crimes in the early 1900s. Hayes had worked several major counterfeiting cases across New England, and his success rate was impressive until the Springfield case. A performance evaluation from late 1908 noted that Hayes had failed to successfully extract a valuable asset, resulting in the loss of crucial evidence and potential compromise of ongoing investigations. The evaluation suggested that Hayes had been reassigned to less sensitive cases following the Patterson family's disappearance. David located Hayes's personal papers donated to the archives by his descendants in the 1960s. Among them was a personal journal that provided heartbreaking insight into the failed operation on August 19, 1908. The Patterson family failed to appear at the arranged extraction point. We waited until dawn, but they never came. Robert had been increasingly nervous during our last meeting, claiming he was being watched. I fear the worst. August 25, 1908. Local authorities found no signs of violence at the Patterson home. Neighbors report seeing the family leave together on the evening of the 18th, carrying suitcases. Some believe they fled voluntarily, but I know Robert better than that. He was committed to seeing this through. September 10th, 1908. The counterfeiting ring has scattered. Without Robert's intelligence and the evidence he promised to provide, we've lost our best opportunity to dismantle the operation. The fake currency continues to circulate, and we're back to square one. The journal entries painted a picture of a dedicated agent tormented by his inability to protect a family that had risked everything to help the federal government. Hayes had spent months trying to locate the Pattersons, following up on reports of families matching their description in cities across the Northeast. But David found one entry that offered hope. October 15th, 1908. Received an unusual letter today, postmarked from Chicago, but with no return address. The handwriting looks like Helen Patterson's. It contained only a pressed flower and a small piece of fabric that matches the dress she wore to our last meeting. I believe they may have escaped safely, but cannot risk contacting us directly. David's heart raced. Could the Patterson family have successfully fled Springfield on their own terms, abandoning the federal extraction plan to protect themselves? The photograph might not be evidence of a tragedy, but rather a family's clever insurance policy before disappearing into new lives. David's investigation took him to Chicago, where he hoped to find traces of the Patterson family if they had. Indeed, fled there in 1908. The city's rapid growth during that period made it an ideal place for a family to disappear and start over with new identities. At the Chicago History Museum, David found records of new residents who had arrived in late summer 1908. The process was painstaking, as many immigrants and migrants from eastern states had flooded into Chicago during this period for industrial jobs. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source: church records. Many families seeking to establish themselves in new communities would join local churches for social connection and respectability. David found baptismal records for two children, a boy named Thomas and a girl named Mary, at St. Patrick's Catholic Church, dated September 1908. The children's parents were listed as James and Catherine Murphy, recent arrivals from Massachusetts. The physical descriptions in the church registry matched Robert and Helen Patterson, and the children's ages were consistent with the Patterson family. David's pulse quickened when he discovered employment. Records showing that James Murphy had found work at a printing company. Exactly the kind of job Robert Patterson's skills would have qualified him for. The Murphy family had rented a small apartment in a working-class Irish neighborhood where new arrivals could blend in easily, but the most compelling evidence came from a letter David found in the Chicago Archdiocesan archives. Written by Catherine Murphy to the church pastor in 1910, it requested prayers for family members back east who had faced great danger and been forced to leave their home. The letter's careful phrasing suggested someone who couldn't speak openly about their past, but needed spiritual comfort for the trauma they had experienced. It was exactly the kind of letter Helen Patterson might have written while living under a false identity. David found records of the Murphy family through 1915, showing steady employment for James and school enrollment for the children. Then, mysteriously, the records stopped. The family seemed to have vanished from Chicago just as completely as they had disappeared from Springfield. But David had proved his theory. The Patterson family had successfully escaped on their own, abandoning the federal extraction plan and creating new identities in Chicago. The picnic photograph had been their insurance policy, a way to preserve evidence in case they were caught or killed before reaching safety. David's discovery that the Patterson family had survived led him to reconsider the significance of the photographic evidence they had left behind. If they had successfully escaped, why had they gone to such elaborate lengths to document the counterfeiting operation? Returning to Agent Hayes' journal, David found clues about the broader scope of the criminal network. The Springfield operation had been just one part of a much larger counterfeiting ring that extended across multiple states. The evidence Robert Patterson had been gathering wasn't just about local criminals. It was about dismantling an entire network. David requested additional Secret Service files from the National Archives, focusing on counterfeiting investigations from 1908 to 1912. What he discovered was remarkable. Over those 4 years, federal agents had systematically dismantled counterfeiting operations in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, using remarkably detailed intelligence about printing methods, distribution networks, and personnel. The breakthrough had begun in late 1908, just months after the Patterson family's disappearance. Agent Hayes had filed reports describing recovered evidence that provided crucial insights into the criminal organization's structure and methods. David realized that the picnic photograph hadn't been lost when the extraction operation failed. Somehow, Agent Hayes had obtained the evidence Robert Patterson had documented, and it had been used to guide investigations for years afterward. Digging deeper into Hayes' correspondence, David found references to a photographic intelligence method that had been adopted as a standard technique for undercover operations. The idea of hiding evidence in plain sight within seemingly innocent family photographs had become a Secret Service protocol. A memo from 1910 credited the technique with revolutionary improvements in our ability to document criminal activities without detection. Robert Patterson's desperate innovation had become a cornerstone of early federal law enforcement methods. David also discovered that Agent Hayes had been promoted rather than demoted following the Springfield case. His personnel file showed commendations for developing new intelligence gathering techniques and successfully disrupting a major counterfeiting network. The official story that the Patterson case had been a failure was a cover story. In reality, it had been one of the Secret Service's most successful operations, providing the intelligence needed to dismantle organized counterfeiting across the Northeast. David's investigation had revealed an extraordinary story of courage, innovation, and sacrifice that had been deliberately obscured by federal secrecy. The peaceful picnic photograph from 1908 had been a masterpiece of covert intelligence gathering, family's desperate plan that had ultimately saved them and helped protect the American monetary system. But one mystery remained. What had happened to the Patterson family after they disappeared from Chicago in 1915? David's search led him to genealogy websites and immigration records, looking for any trace of James and Catherine Murphy or their children. His persistence paid off when he found a marriage certificate from San Francisco, dated 1925. Mary Murphy had married a local merchant, and her marriage application listed her father as James Murphy, deceased, formerly of Chicago and Massachusetts. The physical description and birth date matched the Patterson family's daughter. David contacted the San Francisco City Archives and found death certificates for both James and Catherine Murphy, dated 1923 and 1924 respectively. They had lived under their assumed identities for nearly 20 years before dying of natural causes. But the most remarkable discovery came from Mary Murphy's descendant, Patricia Rodriguez, whom David located through genealogy research. Patricia had inherited a trunk of family documents, including a diary kept by her great-grandmother Catherine. The diary entries from 1908 revealed the full story. August 18th. Robert came home today white as a sheet. The criminals suspect he's been talking to federal agents. We agreed we cannot wait for the government extraction. Too dangerous for the children. We leave tonight, August 20th, safe in Chicago. Robert destroyed all evidence except the photograph, our insurance policy. Agent Hayes will know where to look for the information we documented. Pray, it's enough to stop these criminals. September 15th. The children are adjusting to their new names. We read in the newspaper that federal agents have made arrests in Boston. Robert's evidence must have reached them. We can never return to our old lives, but at least some good has come from our sacrifice. Patricia showed David the most precious item in the trunk, the original negative of the picnic photograph, along with a detailed key explaining how to decode the hidden documents and map embedded in the image. Great-great-grandmother. Catherine always said this photograph saved their lives and helped catch some very bad men, Patricia explained. She made my great-grandmother promise to keep it safe, in case the true story ever needed to be told. David's investigation had uncovered one of the most remarkable stories in early American law enforcement history. The Patterson family's courage and innovation had not only saved their own lives, but had revolutionized federal intelligence gathering methods and helped dismantle a criminal network that threatened the nation's financial security. Working with Patricia Rodriguez and the National Archives, David prepared a comprehensive report documenting the true story behind the 1908 picnic photograph. The Secret Service, now over a century old, was fascinated to learn about this early example of photographic intelligence methods. This represents a pivotal moment in the development of covert documentation techniques, said Secret Service historian Agent Maria Santos. The Patterson family essentially invented methods we still use today, adapted for modern technology. David arranged for the photograph to be properly preserved and displayed at the Secret Service's Headquarters Museum, with a complete explanation of Robert and Helen Patterson's contribution to federal law enforcement. The exhibit would ensure that their sacrifice and innovation were finally recognized after more than a century of secrecy. Patricia Rodriguez traveled from San Francisco to attend the exhibit's opening, carrying the original photographic negative and Catherine Murphy's diary. Standing before the display that told her great-great-grandparents' story, she wiped away tears. They never got to see their grandchildren grow up, never got to return to their real names, she said. But they saved their family and helped their country. I'm proud to finally tell their story. The exhibit attracted national attention, with historians praising the Patterson family's courage and creativity. The peaceful picnic photograph became a symbol of ordinary Americans who made extraordinary sacrifices for their country's security. As David looked at the photograph one final time before it was installed in the museum, he marveled at how Robert Patterson's desperate innovation had evolved into sophisticated intelligence methods still used today. The father's hand, positioned so carefully over those crucial documents, had launched a revolution in covert operations. The Patterson family's legacy lived on in every Secret Service operation that used photographic documentation, every intelligence report hidden in plain sight, and every family that found safety through the courage of federal agents who had learned from Robert and Helen's example. Their peaceful picnic had changed American law enforcement forever, and their story would inspire future generations of those who risk everything to protect their country. The photograph that had seemed so ordinary finally revealed its extraordinary secret, proving once again that the most important stories are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to look carefully enough to see the truth.